I don't want your pity. I just need work." She said it with her chin up, her voice steady, but her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against her skirt so he wouldn't see. Caleb Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men usually looked at a woman standing alone in the cold. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he recognizes, someone carrying a weight he knows the shape of. "Come inside," he said finally, "before you freeze to death on my porch." Before we go further, if this story already has your heart, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow along until the very last word. And drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The snow had been falling for 3 hours by the time Evelyn Carter reached the end of the road. Not the end of the road, in the way people say it when they're feeling dramatic. The actual end. A narrow dirt path that stopped existing somewhere between the last town and the first fence post of a ranch so large she couldn't see where it ended. She had walked the last 2 miles on foot because the wagon driver had only agreed to take her as far as the fork, and beyond that, she was on her own. Her boots were not made for Montana snow. They were Boston boots, pretty sensible, designed for cobblestones and parlor floors, not frozen mud and wind that cut through wool like a blade. By the time she saw the light in the ranch house window, she had stopped feeling her toes entirely. She stopped walking. She made herself breathe. She had come too far to turn back. She had nothing to turn back to. Evelyn Carter, 27 years old, $200 in debt, and the last surviving member of a family business that had collapsed 6 months ago, stood at the gate of Whitmore Ranch and tried to remember who she was before everything went wrong. She was her father's daughter. James Carter had built Carter Accounting from a single desk in a rented room in downtown Boston into one of the most respected small firms in the city. He had taught Evelyn numbers before she could read. He had shown her that columns of figures told stories, stories of where money came from, where it went, what it was hiding. She had sat beside him at his desk every Saturday morning from the age of 7 until the morning he collapsed in that same chair and never got up again. She was 23 when he died. She was 25 when her Uncle Gerald, her father's younger brother, came to her with a plan. He would take over management of the firm. She would keep the books. Together they would keep her father's legacy alive. She had believed him. She had been wrong. By the time Evelyn understood what was happening, the accounts bleeding slowly, the clients quietly redirected to a new firm Gerald had set up quietly under another name. The loans taken out in the company's name, there was nothing left to save. The firm that had taken her father 20 years to build was gone in 2. And Gerald, who had promised on her father's grave that he would protect her, had offered her 2 things on the day it all collapsed: a small envelope of cash that barely covered 1 month's rent and an address in Montana. "Friend of mine runs a ranch out west," he had said. "Big operation. He's always looking for educated people who can manage records. I've written ahead. They're expecting you." She had stood in the empty office where her father had built his life and looked at her uncle's face and thought, "This is what betrayal looks like. It wears your family's eyes." But she had taken the address because she had no other choice. The man in Montana turned out not to be expecting her at all. When she arrived at the Hanover Supply Company on the edge of Billings, after 4 days on a train that smelled of coal smoke and livestock, the owner, a red-faced man named Pittman who chewed tobacco and spoke to her hat, rather than her face, had stared at Gerald's letter like it was written in a foreign language. "Don't know what your uncle told you," he said slowly, "but I got no position here. No bookkeeper spot, no records work, nothing. I got my nephew doing the accounts and he ain't going anywhere. Mr. Pittman, I traveled 4 days." "That ain't my problem, Miss Carter." He had turned back to his ledger while she was still standing at his counter. That had been 6 days ago. She had spent 3 of those days at a boarding house in Billings, using the last of Gerald's cash and the money from selling her mother's small pearl earrings, the only jewelry she'd brought, asking anyone who would listen if they knew of work. The answers were always the same: laundry, cooking, serving at the saloon if she wasn't too proud. She was not too proud. She was too smart to believe those jobs would keep her alive past the first month. On the 4th day, a woman at the boarding house, A schoolteacher named Mrs. Aldrich, who had lived in Montana for 11 years, had leaned across the breakfast table and said quietly, "You said you do accounts." "I do." Whitmore Ranch, about 14 miles south. Caleb Whitmore runs the biggest cattle operation in this part of the territory. His foreman mentioned just last week that their books are a disaster. Man's too stubborn to hire a proper accountant and too busy to fix it himself. "Is he hiring?" Mrs. Aldrich had looked at her carefully. "He's not advertising. But a man whose records are a mess is always hiring whether he knows it or not." Evelyn had written down the name. She had borrowed a wagon ride to the fork in the road. She had walked the last 2 miles, and now she was standing at a gate in the snow, her toes numb and her pride in her throat, looking at a light in a window and trying to convince herself that walking through that gate was courage and not desperation. She told herself, it is both. Walk anyway. She walked. The porch steps were solid good wood, well maintained. She noted that automatically the way her father had taught her to notice small things. A man who kept his porch steps solid kept his word, or at least he paid attention. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. The door opened and the man on the other side was not what she expected. She had imagined someone older. Someone soft around the middle the way prosperous ranchers sometimes were. Someone who would look at her the way Pittman had, like she was an inconvenience wearing a woman's face. Caleb Whitmore was 35 years old, lean in the way that comes from years of hard work rather than youth, with dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes the color of winter sky, just before the light fails gray-blue and very still. He was still wearing his work coat. There was mud on his boots. He was holding a coffee cup in one hand and a ledger in the other, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not annoyance, not suspicion, something more careful than either. "Help you," he said. Evelyn Carter straightened her spine. Her toes were numb. Her last dollar had been spent on the wagon ride that only got her to the fork. She was 27 years old. She was completely alone in the world, and she was standing on a stranger's porch in Montana snow. Do not shake, she told herself. Do not apologize. Do not explain before he asks. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said. "I'm a trained bookkeeper. I was told your ranch records are in poor condition. I'd like the opportunity to fix them." Caleb looked at her. A long, measuring look that started at her face and took in, without rudeness, without anything she could call disrespect, the snow on her coat, the impractical boots, the small suitcase she was holding with both hands. "Who told you that?" he said. "A woman named Mrs. Aldrich in Billings. Martha Aldrich." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, recognition. "She's a reliable woman. She spoke highly of you." "She spoke of my books, not of me," Caleb said. "There's a difference." He looked at her again. "You walked from the fork." "Yes." "In those boots." Evelyn looked down at her boots and then back up at him. "I'm aware they're not ideal." Something moved across his face that might, under other circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't quite get there. "It's 20 degrees out here," he said. "I'm aware of that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. "Come inside," he said, "before you freeze to death on my porch." She stepped through the door. The house was warm, much warmer than she expected. A fire was going in a large stone hearth at the far end of the main room. The room itself was large and practical, furnished with the kind of heavy furniture that was built to last rather than to impress. There were boots lined up near the door, a coat rack that held 2 jackets and a hat, and on the table, she saw it immediately, a stack of ledgers so disorganized that the top one had fallen open and papers were spilling out from between its pages like a wound that hadn't been closed. She made herself not stare at it. Caleb had set his coffee cup down on the table and was looking at her with his arms crossed. "Who are you really?" he said. The question caught her off guard. Not because it was rude, it wasn't. It was honest. The kind of question a man asks when he's been burned before and learned to ask the real thing first. "I told you," she said. "You told me your name and your trade. That's not the same as who you are." He nodded at a chair nearest the fire. "Sit down. You're going to fall over if you don't." She sat. Not because he told her to, Because her legs, she was realizing, had been carrying the weight of 6 days of failure, and they were grateful for the chance to stop. "I'm from Boston," she said. "My father ran an accounting firm there for 20 years. He taught me bookkeeping before I could read properly. When he died, I tried to keep the firm running. My uncle mismanaged it, and when it collapsed, he gave me an address in Montana that turned out to be worthless." She paused. "That is who I am. A woman who came west with a recommendation that led nowhere and is now asking for honest work." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "That's a hard story to tell to a stranger," he said. "It's true. I'd rather tell a hard truth than a comfortable lie." Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically. Caleb Whitmore, she would learn, was not a man who wore his reactions on his face. But there was a change, something in the set of his jaw, some small easing. "My bookkeeping is a mess," he said. "I'll give you that. Haven't had time to deal with it properly, and the man I had doing it left for California 8 months ago." "I could see that from the table," Evelyn said. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out before she thought about it. His eyes went to the stack of ledgers, then back to her. "How long would it take you," he said, "to assess the damage a day, to fix it properly and build a system that won't fall apart again?" She thought for a moment. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if the records go back more than 5 years. They go back 9. Then 4 weeks, possibly 5. "And what do you want in return?" "Room and board," she said. "And fair wages for skilled work. Whatever you'd pay a man for the same job." He raised an eyebrow at that. "That's direct," he said. "My father taught me never to undervalue my work," she said. "I'm not going to start now." For the first time, something that was genuinely close to a smile appeared on Caleb Whitmore's face. It was small and brief, and it changed his whole expression for the half-second it lasted. "All right, Miss Carter," he said. 4 weeks, fair wages. Room in the house. There's a spare room upstairs. You'll eat with the household." He paused. "But I want to be clear about something." "Yes, I don't know you. You don't know me. This is an employment arrangement, nothing more." "I understand completely," she said. "The men on this ranch are good men, but they'll talk. The town will talk worse. If you can live with that, we have a deal." "Mr. Whitmore," Evelyn said, "people have been talking about me my entire life. It has never once stopped me from doing my job." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and straightforward, the kind of handshake that meant what it said. Evelyn Kerr had shaken a great many hands in her professional life. Lawyers, bankers, suppliers, creditors, and she had learned to read them the way her father taught her to read balance sheets. A handshake told you the shape of a person's character before a single word was spoken. Caleb Whitmore's handshake said, "I will keep my word." She had not felt that in a very long time. That first night, Evelyn sat alone in the spare room upstairs, small, plain, clean, with an iron-framed bed and a quilt that smelled of cedar, and allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel the full weight of everything that had brought her here. The grief for her father, the rage at her uncle, the fear of the last 6 days. She pressed her face into the pillow and felt it all, every inch of it. Then she sat up, smoothed the quilt, and opened the only notebook she had left. At the top of a fresh page she wrote Day 1, Whitmore Ranch. Start with the oldest ledger and work forward. She had a job. She had a plan. That was enough for tonight. Downstairs, she heard Caleb's boots on the floor, the scrape of a chair, the quiet sound of a man settling in for the night alone. It was the sound of a house that had been quiet for a very long time. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet that accumulates when no one's been there to fill it. She noticed that too. Her father had always said, "Pay attention to the silences, Evie. They tell you more than the noise ever will." She closed her notebook. She put out the lamp. And for the first time in 6 days, she slept. Morning on the ranch was a different world. Evelyn was up before the sun, a habit left over from her father's house, where the accounts always waited, and the early hours were the clearest ones. She dressed quickly, came downstairs, and found the kitchen empty, but the stove already warm. Someone had started a fire and left a coffee pot on the heat. She poured a cup, found the bread that had been left on the counter, sliced 2 pieces, and sat down at the kitchen table with her notebook. She was 3 pages into her preliminary notes on the ledger situation when the back door opened and 2 men walked in trailing cold air and the smell of hay. They stopped when they saw her. The taller one, young, maybe 22, with an open, friendly face under a battered hat, stared openly. The other one, older, gray-bearded, built like a fence post, narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" the young one said. "Evelyn Carter," she said without looking up from her notebook. "I'm the new bookkeeper." Silence. "Didn't know we were getting a bookkeeper," the older man said. His voice was flat and careful. "Didn't know we were getting a woman bookkeeper." "Now you do," she said. She heard the young one stifle something that might have been a laugh. "Name's Danny," he said, clearly deciding to choose cheerfulness over caution. "Danny Reeves. I work the south pasture mostly. That's Hank." He nodded at the older man. "He's the foreman. Don't mind him. He takes a while to warm up to things." "Most things," Hank said. He was still watching Evelyn with that narrowed-eyed look. "Where's Mr. Whitmore?" "Haven't seen him this morning," Evelyn said. "I assume he's working. He strikes me as the type." Another silence. Then Hank said slowly, "You're going through the books?" "Yes." "All of them?" She looked up for the first time. Hank was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not hostility exactly, something more complicated. "All 9 years of them," she said. "Is that a problem?" Hank said nothing. "It's fine," Danny said quickly, perhaps too quickly. That's a lot of work." "Yes," Evelyn said. "It is." She looked back down at her notebook. After a moment, she heard the 2 men move to the stove, pour coffee, and begin speaking to each other in voices too low for her to make out. She noted the sound of Hank's voice, careful, controlled, giving nothing away. She wrote 1 word in her notebook, very small at the bottom of the page, Hank. She underlined it. She found the first problem on the afternoon of her second day. It wasn't the disorganization that was expected, almost understandable in a working ranch where the person responsible for records had left 8 months earlier, and no one had picked it up since. The disorganization was the mess on the surface. What she found underneath the mess was something else. It started with a delivery invoice. She had been cross-referencing the supply ledger against the payment records, building a picture of what came in versus what went out when she found an entry that didn't match. A hay delivery in March of the previous year, 40 bales listed in the supply ledger as received, payment recorded as made. But when she checked the inventory records from that same month, the number didn't add up. The ranch's feed logs showed supply levels that would only make sense if 30 bales had been delivered, not 40. 10 bales, gone. She set the invoice aside and kept going. Found another one in May. Similar pattern payment, made for a quantity that never fully arrived. A third in August. She spread the documents across the table and looked at them for a long time, working the numbers in her head, the way her father had taught her, not just adding and subtracting, but building the shape of what the numbers meant. The shape that was forming was not one she liked. Someone was billing Whitmore Ranch for deliveries that were short, and someone, either the person receiving deliveries or the person recording them, or both, was making sure the discrepancy never appeared on paper. She thought about Hank. His expression that morning when she said she'd be going through all 9 years. She thought about the word she'd written in her notebook. She did not jump to conclusions. Her father had been very clear on that. Numbers tell the truth, he had said, but they don't always tell the whole truth. Keep working until you see the whole picture. She kept working. By the time Caleb came in. That evening she had pulled records going back 6 years, and she had a list of 12 discrepant invoices totaling conservatively more than $800 in goods that were paid for but never fully received. $800 over 6 years was not a crisis. But it was not nothing. And it was the kind of steady, patient theft that only someone who expected never to be caught would practice. She waited until after supper, which she had eaten in the kitchen while Caleb ate at his desk, because that was apparently his habit, and she respected the routine of a working man, before she knocked on the office door. "Come in." He was at his desk, writing something. He looked up. "Found something," Evelyn said. He set down his pen. "All ready." I need to show you something in the records. It will take a few minutes to explain properly. Something in her voice, or perhaps something in her face, made him push back from his desk without hesitation. He came around to where she had laid out the documents on the side table and stood beside her while she walked him through it. She was aware of how close he was standing. Not close enough to be inappropriate, just close enough that she could feel the slight warmth of him, which in a room that was always 2 degrees colder than the rest of the house felt. She noticed it and filed it away and said nothing. "There," she said, pointing to the first invoice. 40 bales listed paid, but the inventory records from the same week show an intake of 30. Do you see? Caleb looked at the papers for a long moment. She watched his face, that still controlled face, and saw something move through his eyes. Not surprise exactly. More like the look of a man who has been half suspecting something for years and now is looking at the shape of it in the light. "Who handled the supply deliveries?" she asked carefully. "Hank signs for them," Caleb said. His voice was even. Too even. "Has for years." Evelyn said nothing. She waited. "He's been with me for 7 years," Caleb said quietly. "I know that's not easy to hear." "I'm not saying he did it," Caleb said. Fast. A little too fast. "I'm not saying he did either," Evelyn said. "I'm saying these numbers are wrong. It could be the supplier shorting the deliveries and submitting false invoices. It could be a recording error that's been repeated. I'm going to keep pulling records until I have the complete picture. I wanted you to know what I was finding." He looked at the papers for another long moment. Then he looked at her. "You've been here 2 days," he said. "Yes." "And you found this." "Your father's records were waiting to be found," she said. "They've been telling this story for 6 years. They just needed someone to listen." Caleb was quiet. Something passed across his face, not quite the controlled blankness she'd already come to recognize as his default expression, but something beneath it, something that looked very briefly like pain. "Keep going," he said. "Find the whole picture." "I will." He picked up one of the invoices, held it, set it back down. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes. Thank you for telling me." It was such a simple thing to say. Such a basic human thing. "Thank you for telling me." But there was something in the way he said it, quietly, directly, without any performance in it, that made it feel like more than the words. "Of course," she said. She gathered up the documents and went back to her work. She did not let herself think about the way he had said it, or about how long it had been since someone had thanked her for anything. The trouble from town came faster than she expected. On her 4th day at the ranch, Evelyn rode into the small town of Grayfield with Danny to pick up supplies. It was the first time she had left the property since she arrived, and she had not thought much of it. She needed to visit the post office, and Danny was making a run anyway. She thought later that she should have anticipated it. Should have known that a frontier town was small enough that news traveled faster than horses, and that a young woman living at the Whitmore Ranch was the kind of news that people talked about. She was standing at the post office counter, waiting for the postmistress to check for any letters in the Carter name, when she heard it. 2 women standing near the door, talking in the particular register of women who want to be overheard. "Whitmore's got a woman staying at the ranch," the first one said. "I heard," said the second. "From Boston, supposedly. No family, no husband, staying under his roof." A pointed pause. "You know what that means." "Well," the second woman said, "he's been alone a long time. A man gets lonely." Evelyn kept her eyes on the postmistress. She did not turn around. She kept her hands loose at her sides and her face very still. "She's a bookkeeper," Danny said loudly from behind her. She hadn't realized he was close enough to hear. She looked at him. He was staring at the 2 women with an expression of cheerful directness that she found suddenly quite admirable. "Works for Mr. Whitmore same as I do," Danny continued, "fixing his records, which if you've ever tried to read them, you'd know is an actual job that a real person actually does." One of the women made a small affronted sound. Both of them left. Danny came to stand beside Evelyn at the counter. "Sorry about that," he said. "Small towns." "It's all right," she said. "It's not really." She looked at him. The young man with the open face and the battered hat was watching her with an expression of genuine, uncomplicated sympathy, and she thought, here is someone who is exactly who he appears to be. It was rarer than it should have been. No, she said. It's not. But I appreciate you saying something. Mr. Whitmore won't stand for that kind of talk, Danny said with the confidence of someone who had tested this proposition and found it reliable. He's fair. Whatever else people say about him, he's fair. She filed that away with the rest of what she was learning about Caleb Whitmore. A man who kept his porch steps solid, who said thank you for telling me, who his ranch hands trusted to be fair. She went back to the ranch and worked until the lamplight gave out. On the 7th day, something happened that she had not expected. She was in the office deep in the records from 4 years earlier when she heard raised voices outside. She went to the window and saw Caleb standing in the yard with a man she didn't recognize. Heavy-set, well-dressed in the way that frontier prosperity looked, with the kind of bearing that said he was accustomed to getting what he wanted. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the shapes of the conversation in the way both men were standing, and what she read made her uneasy. The heavy-set man was the one doing the talking. Caleb was listening with that very still face, arms at his sides. The stillness that she was starting to understand meant he was containing something. Then the heavy-set man said something, and Caleb's eyes went to the window. Met hers. Held for a moment. She stepped back from the window. She heard the conversation end abruptly from the sound of boots on hard ground. She went back to her desk and was writing when Caleb came in. Who was that? She said, not looking up. A pause. Man named Garrett, Caleb said. Curtis Garrett. He runs most of the supply contracts in this part of the territory. She looked up. He supplies your ranch. He does. Did. Something in Caleb's voice had gone flat in a particular way. He came to tell me there's been a misunderstanding about some invoices. Evelyn was very still. Did he? She said. Seems he heard someone was reviewing the accounts. How would he know that? Caleb said nothing, but his eyes moved very briefly toward the direction of the bunkhouse, the direction of wherever Hank was right now. He offered to correct the invoices, Caleb said carefully. Going forward, as a... He paused on the word. Goodwill gesture. Going forward, Evelyn said, not retroactively. No. She looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Whitmore, she said, in my preliminary count, your ranch has paid for goods it never received to the value of somewhere between $800 and $1,200 over the past 6 years. Possibly more when I finish the full review. She kept her voice even. A man who offers to correct errors going forward but not retroactively is not offering goodwill. He is offering to stop stealing while hoping you don't pursue what he already took. Caleb looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly, I know. She waited. I know exactly what he is, Caleb said. What I need to know is how much I can prove. Keep letting me work, she said. I'll build you a case that can't be questioned. He held her gaze for a moment, that gray-blue winter sky gaze that she was learning to read slowly, like learning a language that used no words. All right, Miss Carter, he said. He went back out. She went back to the records, and somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the columns of figures and the methodical work of rebuilding a financial picture that had been deliberately obscured, she was aware of something she hadn't been aware of when she arrived. She was not just doing a job anymore. She was in the middle of something. Something that had been building long before she showed up on that porch in the snow. Something that involved Caleb Whitmore and Curtis Garrett, and a foreman with careful eyes and 9 years of records that told a story nobody had wanted to hear. She had come here looking for survival. She was finding something considerably more complicated. She did not know yet whether that was a problem. She was beginning to think it might not be. She put her head down. She kept working. The ledgers had more to tell her. She intended to hear every word. The records did not lie. They never did. That was the thing about numbers that Evelyn's father had told her when she was 7 years old, sitting on a stool beside his desk on a Saturday morning with her feet not yet reaching the floor. People lie, Evie. Situations lie. But numbers, when you read them right, always tell the truth. She had carried that with her across 20 years and 2,000 miles, and standing now in Caleb Whitmore's office at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, surrounded by 9 years of ledgers. She understood that the truth the numbers were telling her was worse than she had first believed. It was not $800. It was not $1,200. When she finished cross-referencing every supply invoice against every inventory log, against every payment record, going back to the ranch's 3rd year of operation, the number she wrote at the bottom of the page was $2,340. And that was conservative. That was only counting the discrepancies she could prove with documents in hand. The ones that had been destroyed or never properly recorded, and she could see the shape of those too in the gaps and the inconsistencies. Those were more. She sat back in her chair and looked at what she had built, and felt the particular cold clarity that comes when a picture you've been assembling finally shows you what it is. This was not a careless supplier shorting deliveries and hoping nobody noticed. This was systematic, patient, designed by someone who understood exactly how the ranch's record-keeping worked, who knew which invoices would be checked and which would be filed without scrutiny, and who had been operating with the confidence of a person who believed they were invisible. She thought about Hank. She had been thinking about Hank in the controlled, methodical way she thought about unresolved questions since the first discrepant invoice. She had not accused him. She had not even strongly implied. But she had kept watching the way her father taught her to watch, not for what people said, but for what they did when they thought nobody was paying attention. What Hank did she had noticed was this. Every time Evelyn was in the office working on the supply records, he found a reason to walk past. Not through. Past. A glance at the door, a measured pause, and then gone. He never stopped. He never asked questions. But he always looked. A man with a clear conscience does not check that often on someone reviewing accounts he has nothing to do with. She did not yet have enough to bring to Caleb. What she had was a number and a strong suspicion. What she needed was the connection, something that tied the invoice discrepancies not just to the supplier Garrett, but to whoever inside the ranch was confirming deliveries that hadn't fully arrived. She closed the ledger, put out the lamp, went upstairs. She lay in the dark and listened to the house breathe around her, the creak of timber, the wind against the window, and somewhere below, the sound of Caleb's boots on the floor moving from one room to another, slow and even. The sound of a man who couldn't sleep either. She had not expected to notice things like that. She had not expected to be listening for them. She made herself stop. She closed her eyes and thought about numbers instead. The morning brought frost and a complication she hadn't seen coming. Her name was Adelaide Marsh, and she arrived at the ranch at 9 o'clock sharp in a buggy driven by a hired man wearing a coat that cost more than Evelyn's entire wardrobe and carrying the particular expression of a woman who has decided she is owed something. Evelyn was crossing the yard with a stack of folders when the buggy came through the gate, and she stopped without quite meaning to, watching the woman step down with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being watched. Adelaide Marsh was perhaps 30, dark-haired, handsome, in a precise and deliberate way. She looked at the yard, and then she looked at Evelyn, and the look she gave was the kind that measured and dismissed in the same motion. "You must be the bookkeeper," she said. "I must be," Evelyn agreed. "I'm Adelaide Marsh." She said it the way people say their names when they expect recognition. "My family owns the Marsh Timber Company. We've done business with Whitmore Ranch for years." A small pause. "Is Caleb in?" "I believe so," Evelyn said. "I'll let him know you're here." She went inside and found Caleb in the office, bent over a map spread across the desk. "There's a woman named Adelaide Marsh asking for you," Evelyn said. Something happened to Caleb's face. Not much, but enough. A small tightening around the jaw, a controlled settling of expression that she was learning to read as the thing he did when he needed to prepare himself. "Tell her I'll be right out," he said. She did. Then she went to the kitchen and stayed there with her folders, because it was not her business, and she knew when to remove herself from a room she had no place in. But the kitchen shared a wall with the front room, and Adelaide Marsh had a carrying voice, and Caleb, who was not a quiet man exactly, but a precise one who chose his words like a man spending money. He wasn't sure he had spoke low enough that she could only catch pieces. Heard you had a woman living here. Employment arrangement. Caleb, people are talking. Let them talk. A silence. Then Adelaide's voice again, lower, and something in the tone of it that Evelyn recognized the tone of a woman who has been patient for a long time and is reaching the edge of her patience. She did not catch the words. Caleb's response was short. She heard it clearly, not because he raised his voice, he didn't, but because there was a quality of finality in it that carried through walls. Adelaide, nothing has changed. Another silence. Then boots on the floor, the front door, the sound of a buggy leaving. Evelyn stayed in the kitchen for another 10 minutes until she was reasonably sure the yard was clear and the conversation was finished. Then she went back to the office. Caleb was at the desk again. The map was folded. He was writing. She put her folders down on the side table and began sorting through them without speaking, because she had learned in the past 10 days that Caleb Whitmore operated best in the space between words, and pushing into that space was like pushing against a tide. You could do it, but it cost more than it was worth. After a long moment, Caleb said, "You heard some of that." It was not a question. "Not much," she said. "Enough." She looked up. He was watching her with that direct, still gaze, not embarrassed, not defensive, just waiting to see what she would do with what she'd heard. "It's not my business," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you're going to wonder." "I'm not going to wonder," she said. "It's genuinely not my business, Mr. Whitmore." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Adelaide Marsh has decided she wants to marry me. Has decided it for about 2 years. I have never given her any reason to believe I want the same thing." A pause. "She believes the reason I haven't proposed is that I'm not ready. She doesn't consider the possibility that I'm not interested." Evelyn said nothing. "I'm telling you this," Caleb said, "because she's going to come back, and she's going to be unpleasant to you when she does. I want you to know it has nothing to do with you personally." "I appreciate you telling me," Evelyn said. He nodded once the subject closed and went back to his writing. She went back to her folders. But she was aware in a part of her mind she was trying very firmly to ignore of what he had said. "Nothing has changed." Said to a woman who had been waiting 2 years. Said with the finality of a door closing on something that was never open in the first place. She filed the information away and told herself it meant nothing at all. Numbers were safer. She went back to the numbers. She found the connection on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after she arrived. It was in a detail so small she almost missed it. A signature on a delivery confirmation form, partially smudged, that under better light resolved itself into something she could compare against the other signatures on file. She laid 3 forms side by side, pulled the employment records Caleb kept in the bottom drawer of the desk, found the handwriting sample she needed, and held her breath while she looked. The handwriting matched Hank's. Not approximately, not possibly. Exactly the particular backward slope on the H, the way the K ended without lifting the pen. Hank Dooley, Whitmore Ranch foreman, had signed delivery confirmations for 3 of the most significantly discrepant invoices. Signed them as complete. Signed them knowing that the full quantity had not arrived. Her hands were very steady when she gathered the documents. Her heart was not. She found Caleb in the barn. "I need to show you something," she said. "Now." He looked at her face and came immediately, not asking questions. In the office, she laid out the evidence, the invoices, the inventory records, the delivery confirmations, the handwriting comparison, and walked him through it the same way she had walked through the first batch, except that this time the conclusion at the end had a name on it. She watched Caleb's face as she spoke. Watched the thing that moved through his eyes, the thing that was not quite betrayal, because betrayal implies surprise, and what she was seeing was the look of a man whose deepest fear is being confirmed in broad daylight. 7 years, Caleb said when she finished. "Yes." "He's been with me 7 years." "Yes." I was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she began to wonder if she should leave him alone with it. Then he said without looking at her, "His wife left him 4 years ago. Took the kids. He needed money." He said it very quietly, not as a defense, but as the thing he was trying to understand. "I would have helped him. If he'd asked, I would have helped him." I know, she said. But he didn't ask. No. Caleb stood very still for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me to make this case complete? Something that can go to the sheriff without question." "Two more things," she said. "I need the original delivery logs from the supplier Garrett's copies, not yours. And I need someone who was present at one of these deliveries who can confirm the count was short." "Danny was present at the August delivery," Caleb said immediately. "He mentioned it to me at the time, said it seemed like they were a few bales short. I told him Hank had counted and it was fine." A long pause. "I should have listened." "You trusted your foreman," Evelyn said. "That's not a fault." He looked at her. Something in the look, unguarded just for a moment, made her throat tighten in a way she was not prepared for. "You should talk to Danny," she said. "And we need to get Garrett's original delivery logs. I have a legal argument for how to do that if you want to hear it." "Tell me," he said. She told him. He listened. He asked two sharp, precise questions that told her he was not a man who operated on the surface of things, that beneath the quiet and the stillness, there was a mind that worked fast when it needed to. When she finished, he said, "Do it." "It could get complicated," she said. "Garrett has connections in this territory. Curtis Garrett isn't just a supplier. He's—" "I know what he is," Caleb said. The flatness was back in his voice, but it was a different kind of flat now. The flat of someone who has made a decision and is done with the deliberation. "He's been operating on the assumption that nobody here would figure it out, and that even if they did, nobody would bother to take him on." He paused. He was almost right. Almost. The words sat in the air between them for a moment. "I'll talk to Danny today," Caleb said. "You keep building the case." He was almost to the door when he stopped and turned back. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes. When I hired, I thought I was getting someone to clean up a mess in my records." A pause. "I didn't know I was getting someone who would find out that the mess was this." "I know," she said. "I want you to know that I'm grateful. That's not a small thing. What you've done here." He was not comfortable saying it. She could see that the slight set of his jaw, the way he chose the words, like he was choosing them carefully from a limited supply. But he said it anyway, and that the fact of him saying it anyway was what caught her. "Thank you," she said. "I'm glad I could help." He nodded. Went out. She stood alone in the office for a moment, with her hands flat on the desk, looking at the documents that had taken 11 days to build, and thought about a man with 7 years of trust who didn't ask for help when he needed it, and a rancher who would have given it if he'd been asked, and the particular way that pride and desperation can hollow out something that once had a solid foundation. She thought about what it cost to trust someone. She went back to work. The thing she had not counted on was Danny. Not in a bad way. In the way that people surprise you when you've already decided what category they belong in. She had filed him as young, friendly, harmless, useful. The kind of person who exists at the periphery of important events and provides comic relief. She had not expected him to be, as it turned out, the person who held the piece of the story that changed everything. She was in the kitchen the evening after Caleb spoke to him, drinking coffee and going over notes, when Danny came in with the particular air of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it before they walk through the door. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. He sat down across from her. He was not laughing now. The open face was serious in a way that aged him, that showed her a Danny who existed beneath the easy good humor, a Danny who paid attention to more than she had given him credit for. "The August delivery," he said. "I told Mr. Whitmore it seemed short. He's probably told you that." "He has. What I didn't tell him, what I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think it mattered at the time, is that I saw Hank talking to Garrett's driver after the delivery. Private conversation. Around the side of the barn, where you can't see from the house." He paused. "It was quick. I didn't think much of it. Now I think I should have." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "You'd be willing to say that to the sheriff if it comes to that?" "Yes," Danny said without hesitating. "Mr. Whitmore's been fair to me for 3 years. He's a good man. He doesn't deserve this." She heard the simple loyalty in it, uncomplicated and real, and it moved her in a way she hadn't anticipated. There was something about loyalty offered freely without calculation that she had not encountered enough of in her life. "Thank you, Danny," she said. He nodded, stood up, and was almost to the door when he stopped, a different echo of Caleb's motion earlier that day. And she wondered, not for the first time, what it was about this house that made people stop in doorways. "For what it's worth," Danny said, not looking at her. "The men on this ranch, most of them, they respect you. What you've done in 2 weeks is more than what's been done in 2 years. He paused. "And Mr. Whitmore, he's different since you got here. Quieter and not quiet at the same time, if that makes sense." She didn't know what to say to that. "Go to bed, Danny," she said. He laughed, the real one, easy and bright, and went. She sat alone in the kitchen for a while, after her coffee gone cold, turning the phrase over in her mind. Quieter and not quiet at the same time. She understood what he meant. She had felt it herself. In the way a room changes when someone enters it, who fills the air differently. In the way she had started noticing without meaning to the particular rhythm of Caleb's days, the hour he came in from the morning work, the way he drank his coffee standing at the window, the sound of his voice from the next room when he was talking to the hands and thought nobody was close enough to notice the warmth in it. She noticed. She had been noticing for days. She also noticed that she was 27 years old, alone in the world, employed on a temporary basis by a man who had made very clear that their arrangement was professional, and that whatever she thought she was noticing was a feeling she could not afford. She picked up her notebook. She worked until midnight. The letter arrived on a Friday. She knew it was from Gerald. Before she opened it, she recognized the handwriting on the envelope, and something cold moved through her chest at the sight of it. She stood in the post office in Grayfield, holding the letter for a moment, then put it in her coat pocket, and did not open it until she was back at the ranch, sitting in the office with the door closed. It was short. Gerald was brief when he thought brevity would serve him. "Evelyn, I heard you found a position in Montana. I am glad. I wanted you to know that the situation with the firm was not as I made it seem. There are business complexities you were not in a position to understand at the time. I have reconstructed most of your father's clients under a new arrangement. If you wanted to return to Boston, there might be a place for you. Gerald." She read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully, put it back in the envelope, and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. She understood exactly what the letter was. It was not an apology. It was not an explanation. It was a man who had heard through some pipeline she couldn't trace that she was doing well enough that she was no longer desperate, and was now recalibrating his position. "There might be a place for you" meant, "If I need you, I'll use you again." It was the letter of a man who valued people for what they could provide. She had spent 2 years in his orbit without understanding what he was. She understood now. She put the letter in the bottom of her trunk and did not read it again. But it planted something in her that she did not want. Planted the reminder that her presence at Whitmore Ranch had an expiration date. 4 weeks, she had said. Maybe 5. She was almost at 4. The case against Garrett and Hank was close to complete. The accounting system she had built would run without her. There was no legitimate professional reason for her to stay beyond another week, perhaps 2. She sat with that for a long time. She was still sitting with it when Caleb came in and stopped in the doorway, because of course he did, and looked at her face. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing important," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that reading look, the one she was still learning. Then he came in, pulled the other chair around, sat down across from her, not at the desk, not at the professional distance they maintained, and said simply, "Tell me." She looked at him. "It's personal," she said. "I know, tell me anyway." She told him about Gerald. Not everything, not the full excavation of 2 years of watching her father's legacy dismantled, but enough. The letter. What it meant. What it said about the man who sent it. She kept her voice even, and she thought she was managing it well, until she got to the part about the firm. About the last morning she had stood in the empty office and understood that it was really gone, and her voice did a thing she hadn't given it permission to do. Caleb did not say, "I'm sorry." He did not say, "That's terrible." He did not reach for the easy comfort that people reach for when they don't know what else to do. He said, "Your father built something real. The fact that someone took it doesn't make it less real. She looked at him. That doesn't sound like something a rancher says, she said. My father built something real too, he said. And then he died and left it to me when I was 19, and I spent the next 16 years terrified I was going to lose it. He said it flatly without drama. Just the truth of it laid down like something he'd carried a long way and was tired of carrying alone. I know what it's like to be responsible for something you love and not be sure you're going to be enough for it. The silence between them was different from the silences before. Those had been the silences of two people being professional. This was the silence of two people who have said something real and are sitting in the after of it. I don't know if I'm going to be enough for this, Evelyn said quietly. She wasn't sure she meant to say it out loud. You've been enough for everything this ranch has thrown at you in 4 weeks, Caleb said. You found a theft nobody found in 6 years. You built a system that will outlast your time here. You did it while a town full of people were... He stopped. His jaw tightened. You did it under circumstances that would have made most people quit. I thought about quitting, she said honestly. The first week. What stopped you? She thought about it. The numbers, she said. They were telling a story, and I wanted to know the end of it. He almost smiled. That brief, real thing that transformed his face when it happened. That's the most accurate thing I've ever heard anyone say about staying somewhere they didn't have to. She looked at him, really looked the way she'd been carefully not doing for 4 weeks. The tired eyes. The set of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time without putting it down. The particular aloneness of the person who has been alone so long, they've stopped expecting anything else. She recognized it because she had been looking at it in mirrors for 3 years. Caleb, she said, his given name which she had not used before. It came out before she decided to say it. He went very still. I want to finish the case, she said. I want to see it through, not because of the contract, because it matters. Because what Garrett and Hank did to you matters, and it should be seen, and I want to be the one who sees it seen. She paused. Can I stay until it's done? Properly done. He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she became aware of the fire behind her and his face in the firelight, and the particular quality of the quiet around them. Yes, he said. Simply. No conditions, no caveats. Just the single word. Thank you, she said. He stood up. She thought he was going to leave that the moment whatever it was over, and they would go back to being the employer and the employee with the professional distance maintained. But instead, he stood there for just 1 more second looking at her with the winter sky eyes and said, I'm glad you knocked on that door. Then he went out. She sat alone by the fire for a long time, not reading, not working, not doing anything useful at all. Just sitting with the warmth and the quiet, and the thing he had said, and the feeling of something she had not felt in so long. She had to think hard to remember what it was called. She was not careful enough with it. She knew that. She knew it even then, sitting in the firelight, that she was letting herself feel something she would have been wiser to hold at arm's length. But she was tired of arm's length. She was tired of careful. She let herself feel it, outside somewhere on the ranch. The wind picked up and the cold pressed against the windows, and the night settled deep into the Montana darkness. And inside the house, 2 people who had both learned to live without warmth sat in separate rooms, both awake, both quiet, both carrying something new that neither of them had a name for yet, across the territory in his office in Grayfield. Curtis Garrett sat at his own desk and read the letter his man had delivered from the Whitmore Ranch. His contact inside the ranch had warned him the woman was close. She was building something that could not be undismantled once it was complete. He folded the letter. He set it down. He picked up a pen and wrote a response. He had not built what he had built by letting people finish what they started. She would not be allowed to finish. Garrett's letter reached Hank on a Saturday morning tucked inside a feed order, like it was nothing, like it was just paper, among paper, routine among routine. Evelyn didn't know about the letter then. She wouldn't know for days. But she felt something shift in the house that morning, the way you feel weather changing before the sky shows it a pressure difference, a stillness that wasn't restful. Hank was different at breakfast. He poured his coffee without speaking, which was not unusual. but he stood with his back to the room in a way he hadn't before. And when Danny said something to him, some easy remark about the south pasture fence, Hank answered without turning around. One word. Done. Danny caught Evelyn's eye across the table. She gave him nothing back. She went to the office and opened her ledger and sat for a moment without writing anything, listening to the shape of the morning. Something was moving. She could feel it. She just didn't know yet what direction it was coming from. Caleb left 3 days later. The cattle dispute had been building for 2 weeks. A conflict between 3 ranchers over grazing rights on a shared section of federal land that had gotten ugly enough to require the ranchers themselves to ride out and settle it before lawyers got involved and everybody lost. He told her at supper the night before, in the direct, no-ceremony way he had developed for telling her things he expected her to handle. "I'll be gone 4, maybe 5 days," he said. "Possibly a week if the Hendersons dig in the way they usually do." "I'll manage the records while you're gone," she said. "I know you will." He paused. "There's more to it than that. The men will look to you to help manage the house. The accounts, the supply orders, anything that comes in. You know where everything is now better than anyone." She looked at him. "You're asking me to run the ranch while you're gone. I'm asking you to be the person inside this house who knows what's happening. The men can handle the physical work, but the decisions about the house, the accounts, anything that requires thinking." He stopped, started again. "I trust your judgment, more than anyone else here." She heard what was underneath that. He did not say it easily. Caleb Whitmore was a man for whom trust was not a word he reached for without meaning it all the way down. "All right," she said. He left before dawn the next morning. She heard the horses in the yard, heard the voices of the men riding out with him, heard the sound of hooves on frozen ground growing smaller and then gone. She stood in the kitchen with her coffee and felt the house settle into a different shape around her. The shape of a place where the person who held it together was absent. She squared her shoulders. She went to work. For 2 days, nothing happened. The ranch ran as it always ran. The men did their work, the house kept its rhythm, and Evelyn sat in the office building the last pieces of the case against Garrett. She was close. She could feel the shape of it almost complete the way she could feel a column of figures approaching its total, that sense of convergence of things about to resolve. On the 3rd day, Adelaide Marsh came back. She arrived in the afternoon unannounced, and this time she didn't ask for Caleb. She walked into the front room like she owned it, which Evelyn understood immediately was precisely the point, and looked at Evelyn sitting at the desk with the ledgers spread around her and said pleasantly, "Caleb's not here, I hear." "He's not," Evelyn said. She did not stand up. Adelaide looked at the ledgers, then at Evelyn, then at the room in general with the slow appraising look of a woman cataloging what belongs to her. "You've made yourself quite comfortable," she said. "I've made the office functional," Evelyn said, "which is what I was hired to do." Hired. Adelaide repeated the word like she was tasting it for something. "Yes, that's the arrangement, isn't it?" She moved toward the fireplace, not sitting, just positioning herself in the center of the room. "I want to be very clear with you, Miss Carter, about what this situation looks like, from outside. I imagine it looks like an employer who needed skilled help and found it," Evelyn said. "It looks like a woman with no family and no prospects making herself indispensable to a man who is lonely enough to mistake convenience for something else." Adelaide's voice was still pleasant. That was the impressive part. "I've known Caleb for 6 years. He is a good man who makes poor decisions when he is tired. I would hate to see someone take advantage of that." Evelyn set down her pen. She looked at Adelaide Marsh, the expensive coat, the careful face, the eyes that were doing something complicated and not entirely comfortable to watch, and understood something she hadn't fully understood before. Adelaide Marsh was not simply arrogant. She was afraid. The arrogance was the shell of the fear built up over 2 years of being told in increasingly unmistakable ways that the man she wanted did not want her back. That understanding did not make Evelyn kind, but it made her precise. "Miss Marsh," she said, "I have been employed by Mr. Whitmore for 4 weeks. In that time I have found and documented a 6-year financial fraud being carried out against his ranch. I have built a record-keeping system that will save him hundreds of dollars a year going forward. And I have done all of this while you and several others in this town have made every effort to suggest that my presence here is something it is not. She paused. My integrity is not in question. And whatever your feelings about Mr. Whitmore's situation, they are between you and him, not you and me. The silence was very loud. Adelaide's pleasant expression had slipped. Underneath it was something rawer, not rage, but something that had been held together for a long time and was showing the strain. He'll never love someone like you, she said quietly. It was meant to land like a knife. Evelyn felt it land, but she had been carrying heavier wounds than this for longer. That's not something either of us gets to decide, she said. Good afternoon, Miss Marsh. Adelaide left. Evelyn sat alone in the office for 5 full minutes after the door closed, doing nothing. Not working, not writing, not thinking about numbers. Just sitting with the thing that had been said. Someone like you, and the particular shape of pain that comes not from cruelty, but from the chance that cruelty might be right. Then she picked up her pen. She went back to work. The first rumor reached her through Danny on the 4th day of Caleb's absence. And it came fast, the way bad things come when someone has decided to move. There's talk in town, Danny said, coming in from Grayfield with the supply run. I run his voice careful in a way it usually wasn't. About you. About Mr. Whitmore. What kind of talk? That you came here with a plan. That you knew about the accounts before you arrived. That you've been, I don't know how to say this. Say it, Evelyn said. That you've been falsifying the records, not finding fraud, creating it, to make yourself look necessary. He said it fast, like pulling a splinter, and then looked at her with an expression of such naked misery that she knew he didn't believe a word of it. She set down the document she was holding, very carefully. Who's saying this? She said. I heard it from 2 different people at the supply store. Both of them said they'd heard it from... He stopped. From whom? Danny looked at the floor. From Hank. The pieces clicked together the way pieces do when you've been looking at them long enough. Not a surprise, but a confirmation. Hank, who had a letter from Garrett. Hank, who had watched her work for weeks with those careful, calculating eyes. Hank, who now understood that she was close to finishing what she'd started and had decided that the best defense was to make the charge before the charge could be made against him. Evelyn stood up. Danny, she said, where is Hank right now? Bunkhouse, I think. I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to the bunkhouse and tell Hank that I want to speak with him in the office. Don't tell him why. Don't tell him what we talked about. Just deliver the message. Danny looked at her. Are you sure about this? No, she said honestly. But do it anyway. Danny went. Evelyn sat back down, pulled her most complete summary of the case to the top of the pile, and placed it in the center of the desk. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat was not. Hank did not come. She waited 20 minutes. Sent Danny again. Danny came back alone, and there was something different in his face. He's gone, Danny said. His gear's gone. The horse he came with. He stopped. He's gone, Miss Carter. The room was very quiet. She had moved too slowly. Or rather, Garrett had moved faster than she expected, and Hank had understood what the rumor was for. Not just to damage her reputation, to force her hand, to make her react before she was ready to draw her out into a confrontation that would happen on Garrett's terms rather than hers. And Hank running. Hank disappearing before the case was complete, before Caleb was back, before there was anyone here with the authority to hold him. That was exactly what Garrett wanted. A story half told is no story at all. Evidence without a witness was just paper. She needed to think. She sat very still and made herself think. The case she had built was strong. The documents were irrefutable. The invoice discrepancies, the delivery confirmations, in Hank's handwriting, the payment records. But Danny's testimony about seeing Hank with Garrett's driver was the link that tied it together. Without Hank available to face the evidence, Garrett's defense would be simple. Hank had acted alone, and Garrett's company had been as deceived as anyone. The supplier would walk away, the foreman would have disappeared, and Evelyn would be left holding a case against a ghost, unless she could get Garrett's original delivery logs. She had been working toward that through legal channels, through a formal request that Caleb had sent to Garrett's company before he left, requesting access to documentation as part of an internal accounting review. Garrett had not responded. The request was sitting unanswered somewhere in Garrett's office, but Garrett's company kept public business records, filed with the territorial government as part of operating requirements. And those records, the official filed copies, not the operational logs, but the filed annual summaries, were accessible. Were in fact sitting in the county records office in Grayfield, filed every year as required. She had not gone to look at them because she had assumed the operational logs would be more complete. But if the filed records showed the same discrepancies, if Garrett had been filing public records that didn't match what he was billing to the ranch, then she didn't need Hank. She didn't need the delivery confirmations. She had a case built entirely on paper that Garrett himself had put into government hands. She stood up so fast, she knocked the chair back. "Danny," she said, "can you get me to Grayfield and back before dark?" He stared at her. "It's already past 3. Can you get me there and back before dark?" He looked at her face and said, "Get your coat." The county records office was a narrow room in the back of the courthouse, managed by a man named Perkins, who looked at Evelyn when she walked in with the expression of a person who has never been asked for Territorial Supply Company records by a woman in slightly muddy boots, and wasn't entirely sure the situation was legal. She asked for the Garrett Supply Company annual filings for the past 7 years. Perkins disappeared into the back room and came out with a box. She stood at the counter and read fast, the way her father had taught her to read records, scanning for the pattern before you look at the detail, finding the shape of the story before you read the words. And within 20 minutes, she found exactly what she needed. Curtis Garrett's company had been filing annual summaries with the territorial government that showed delivery quantities for major ranch contracts. The quantities he had filed matched exactly what he had been billing to the ranch, which meant that the short deliveries, the 30 bales filed as 40, the discrepancies she had documented in the ranch's records, were not errors that Hank had created on his end. They were discrepancies between what Garrett had officially reported to the government and what had actually been delivered, which meant Curtis Garrett had filed false records with the territorial government. That was not theft from a ranch. That was fraud against the territory. It was a crime of an entirely different order. She wrote down every relevant figure, every filing date, every number. Her hand moved faster than it ever had. Perkins watched her from across the counter with his arms folded, and she ignored him completely. When she finished, she thanked him, put her notebook in her coat, and walked out into the cold afternoon air where Danny was waiting with the wagon. "Did you get what you needed?" he said. "I got more than I needed," she said. "Let's go." They were halfway back to the ranch when the wagon stopped. Not because Danny pulled the horses up. Because there was a man in the road. He was alone on horseback, positioned in the center of the track, with the particular deliberateness of a person who is not lost and not waiting for directions. He was perhaps 40, heavy built, and he was looking at the wagon with an expression of flat professional unfriendliness. "Miss Carter," he said. She did not answer. "Mr. Garrett would like a word with you," he said. "He says there's been a misunderstanding about some business records, and he'd like to clear it up in person." "Tell Mr. Garrett," Evelyn said, "that any communication he wishes to have with me can be directed to Mr. Whitmore, who will be returning within the next 2 days. Mr. Garrett would prefer to resolve this before Mr. Whitmore returns." "I'm certain he would," she said. The man on the horse looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Danny. Danny was not a large man, but he had the particular stillness of someone who has decided exactly what he will do if the situation requires it, and that stillness was its own kind of statement. "Miss Carter," the man said again, his voice dropping to something quieter and therefore more frightening. "You have documents that don't belong to you. I have public territorial records that belong to every citizen of this territory," she said. "Good evening." She looked at Danny. Danny clicked the horses forward. The man on the road held his position for 3 seconds, she counted, because that was the kind of thing she did when she was frightened and didn't want to show it, and then moved his horse aside. They did not speak until they were through the gate of the ranch. Then Danny said very quietly, "He's going to try something." "I know," she said. What do we do? She thought for exactly 5 seconds. We make sure the documents are somewhere safe before he can, and we get word to Caleb. How he's 3 days out. How fast can you ride? Danny looked at her. You want me to go after him? I want someone to know where I am and what I have. If something happens to me before he gets back. Nothing is going to happen to you, Danny said, and there was a fierceness in it that was different from his usual easy brightness. I'm not leaving this ranch while you're here alone. Danny, I'll send one of the other men. Tom's fast, and he knows the Henderson territory. He can ride out tonight, find Mr. Whitmore, bring him back. He looked at her. You're not alone here. Stop acting like you are. She opened her mouth to argue, closed it. All right, she said. Tom rode out within the hour. Evelyn sat at the office desk with every document she had assembled spread before her, and she began to write. Not notes, not working analysis. A formal, complete written account of everything she had found. Every invoice, every discrepancy, every number, every date. Garrett's territorial filings, cross-referenced against the ranch records, with the specific fraud clearly articulated. Danny's testimony written in full, and signed by Danny, who sat in the chair across from her and read every word before he signed it and said, "That's exactly right," with a quiet steadiness that made her grateful for him in a way she couldn't quite express. She finished at 2 a.m. She made 2 copies of the complete document, one sealed in an envelope with instructions that it be delivered to the county sheriff. If anything prevented her from delivering it herself, the other kept on her person. She went upstairs. She lay down on the bed with her coat still on and her boots still on because she did not think she would sleep and she wanted to be ready. She slept for 4 hours. She woke to voices in the yard. Not Tom. Not Caleb. Wrong voices. 2 of them male, the kind that carried without shouting and were trying not to. She was at the window before she was fully awake, and what she saw below was Hank Dooley standing at the gate of the ranch yard, talking to a man she had never seen, and something changing hands between them, small, too small to see clearly, and then the man gone, and Hank turning toward the house. She was downstairs and at the office door before Hank reached the porch. He stopped when he saw her. Whatever he had expected to find at this hour, it was not Evelyn Carter fully dressed and standing in the hallway with an expression he could not read. "Miss Carter," he said. There was nothing in his voice. He had stripped it of everything. "Hank," she said. "Come in." Come in," she said again. He came in. She closed the door and turned to face him. In the lamplight, she saw what the weeks of watching had concealed: a man who was exhausted. Not just physically. The deep exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a lie for so long, it has become more familiar than the truth, and who is now faced with the moment where the lie stops working and doesn't know what's on the other side of it. She had felt that once. Not with theft, but with the slow understanding of what Gerald had been doing for 2 years. The particular nausea of a reality you should have seen sooner. She did not feel sorry for Hank, but she understood something about him. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She remained standing. "I know about the deliveries," she said. "I know about the invoices. I know about the money. I know about your arrangement with Garrett." She paused. "And I know that he just sent someone here to buy your silence or your help, and that what you do in the next 10 minutes is going to determine what the next 10 years of your life look like." Hank said nothing. His jaw was tight. His hands on his knees were not quite still. "If Garrett goes down," she said, "and he is going to go down, I have territorial filing records that make this a government fraud case, not just a civil dispute. Then everyone connected to him goes down with him. Unless..." She paused. "Unless there's someone who was involved peripherally, who cooperated fully, who provided testimony, and whose lawyer can make the case that he was under financial duress and was manipulated by a man with more power than him." She let that sit. "I'm not a lawyer. I am not making you a promise. But I've read enough contracts and legal correspondence to know how these situations typically resolve." Hank raised his eyes to her face for the first time. "Why would you?" he started. Stopped. "I'm not doing it for you," she said honestly. I'm doing it because Caleb needs a complete case, not a case with holes in it. Your testimony closes the holes. The silence stretched. Then Hank said very quietly, he told me it was just rounding. That's how he put it. Said the invoices were just rounding differences. Said everybody did it. He stopped. His voice had gone rough at the edges. By the time I understood what it actually was, I was already in it far enough that pulling out meant everything coming out. I thought maybe it would just... He stopped again. Stop on its own, she said. Yeah. It never does, she said. You know that now. He looked at his hands. Is Caleb going to what's he going to? I don't know, she said. Then, because she believed in telling hard truths. But I know that a man who comes forward is a different thing than a man who gets caught. And Caleb Whitmore is a fair man. She meant it. She believed it completely. Write down everything, tonight. All of it from the beginning. Sign it. I'll keep it with the rest of the case. Hank looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out his hand. She had a pen and paper in front of him within 30 seconds. He wrote for 2 hours. She sat across the room and worked on her own documents and did not watch him because privacy in a moment like this was the least she could offer. When he finished, he slid the pages across the desk to her without speaking. She read them. They were complete. They were honest, the particular honesty of someone who has decided finally to put down something they've been carrying too long. She looked up at him. Thank you, she said. He flinched at the words. Don't thank me, he said. I stole from him for 6 years. I know, she said. And now he'll know why and how and have everything he needs to take the man who set it up. She paused. That's not nothing. Hank stood, moved toward the door, stopped because this was a house where people stopped in doorways. She was convinced of it. Now she would never stop noticing it, and said, You're going to stay, aren't you? After all this. She opened her mouth to answer. The front door opened. Caleb was standing in the doorway. Not in 2 days. Not tomorrow. Now tonight with Tom behind him and the cold air coming in around him and the look on his face of a man who rode hard for 12 hours on bad sleep because someone he trusted sent word that the person at his ranch needed him. He looked at Evelyn. His gaze moved to Hank. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes went very, very still. Hank squared his shoulders, met Caleb's gaze. I owe you the truth, Hank said. All of it. I'll tell you whatever you need. Caleb looked at him for a long measuring moment. Then he stepped aside from the door and gestured once for Hank to go out. He would deal with Hank later. That was in the set of his jaw, the quiet command of it, but also in the absence of rage. This was a man who intended to handle this correctly, not emotionally. Hank went. And then it was just Caleb still standing in the doorway, and Evelyn at the desk with the documents spread before her, and the lamplight and everything that had happened in the past 5 days sitting between them like a river. You rode all night, she said. Tom found us yesterday afternoon, he said. We rode straight through. You didn't have to. Tom said a man stopped your wagon in the road, Caleb said. His voice was very even. The kind of even that is on the other side of something it took effort to cross. He said you were alone here with whatever Garrett was planning next. I handled it, she said. I know you did. He came into the room fully, then closed the door behind him and stood looking at her across the desk. Looking at everything on the desk, the documents, the copies, the sealed envelope, the pages Hank had written. He took it in with those reading eyes, and she watched him understand the full shape of what she had built. You finished it, he said. Yes. Territorial fraud charge, not just theft from the ranch. Yes. Something moved through his expression. Something that was not the brief, small, almost smile she had been watching for. Something larger, more complex. A man confronting the fact that while he was away, the person he left behind had done something remarkable, and the feeling that came with understanding that was not simple. Evelyn, he said. Her name. Her given name, the way she had used his that night by the fire, an unlocking of something held closed. I have to tell you something, he said. I thought about it the whole ride back. I've been thinking about it for a month." He stopped. The stillness was back, but it was different, the stillness of someone choosing deliberately to stop being still. "I'm not good at this, at saying things. You know that." "I know," she said. "I need you to know." He stopped again. Started differently. "When Tom found me and said you were alone, and Garrett's man had stopped your wagon." I turned around and rode before Tom finished his second sentence. "And on the way back I kept thinking about what I would say to you when I got here. What I should say." He looked at her. "And I realized that I've been thinking about what to say to you for a month. Since that first night in the kitchen when you told me about your father. Since the morning you knocked on my door with your impractical boots and told me you didn't want pity, you wanted work." She was very still. "I don't want another employee," he said. I need you to understand what you've become here. Not to the ranch. To me." Outside, the dark was beginning to soften at the edges. Somewhere on the ranch the day was starting without either of them, and neither of them moved. She thought about the woman who had walked 2 miles through snow because she had nothing left to lose. She thought about what she had built in 5 weeks on someone else's land with someone else's records. She thought about every document on the desk between them and what it had cost her to build them and what it meant that she had. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly. Caleb let out a breath that had been in him for a long time. "Not because of the contract," she said. "Not because of the case. Because," she stopped, found the word. "Because this is the first place in 3 years where I felt like myself." He came around the desk. He did not say anything. He stood in front of her and raised one hand and placed it open. Careful nothing demanded against the side of her face. She pressed into it the warmth of it, the solid presence of a hand that had kept its word. They stood like that for a moment in the lamplight, while the Montana dark began slowly to become morning. And somewhere in Grayfield, Curtis Garrett was waking up and reaching for his pen to write the next move. He did not know yet that his foreman had talked. He did not know yet that territorial records already sat in a sheriff's office with a sealed letter explaining exactly what they proved. He was about to find out. The sheriff's name was Roy Maddox, and he had been lawman in Grayfield for 14 years. He was not a man who moved fast or spoke much, but he was a man who read documents the way a doctor reads symptoms carefully, without rushing to the conclusion before the evidence was complete. He sat at his desk that Monday morning with Evelyn's sealed envelope open in front of him, and the territorial filing records beside it, and Hank Dooley's 2-hour confession on top of everything, and he read every word of all of it without speaking. Caleb sat across from him. Evelyn sat beside Caleb. They had ridden into town together at 8 in the morning side by side, and if the people of Grayfield who watched them pass had something to say about that. Evelyn no longer particularly cared. When Maddox finished reading, he set the last page down and looked up. "This is the cleanest case I've seen in 14 years, he said. Evelyn said nothing. "Territorial fraud is federal jurisdiction," Maddox continued, "which means this goes above my pay grade. But my job is to preserve the evidence and hold the parties until the federal marshal gets here, and I can do that today." He looked at Caleb. "Garrett's going to know within the hour. He'll try to move." "Then move faster," Caleb said. Maddox almost smiled. "That's the plan." He stood, picked up the documents with both hands like they were worth exactly what they were, and said, "I'll need you both available for the next 2 days. Don't go anywhere I can't find you." "We'll be at the ranch," Caleb said. They rode back mostly in silence, but it was not the silence of two people with nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who had said enough for the moment, and were sitting with it, letting it settle into the ground, the way rain settles after a long dry season. Not dramatic, just necessary. Just real. Somewhere past the second mile without planning it. Caleb reached across the space between their horses and put his hand briefly over hers on the reins. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything either. He took his hand back after a moment, and they kept riding. She thought, this is what it feels like when something is true. She had not felt that in a long time. She had spent 3 years in arrangements built on convenience and obligation and survival. This was not any of those things. This was something that had grown in 6 weeks without either of them trying to grow it. something that had come up through the hard ground of loneliness and work and honesty, and had arrived finally at this two people riding in the same direction, not performing anything for anybody. Garrett was arrested by 2 o'clock that afternoon. Danny came in from town with the news, breathless, his hat half off, and stood in the kitchen doorway with an expression of pure, uncomplicated triumph that made Evelyn feel something warm loosen in her chest. "They got him at his office," Danny said. "Maddox and 2 deputies. Garrett tried to say there'd been a misunderstanding, that the records were in error, that his bookkeeper had made mistakes." Danny stopped to laugh, shaking his head. Maddox put the territorial filings on his desk and asked him to explain the specific numbers, and he just stopped talking. "Good," Caleb said from the doorway of the office where he'd come to listen. "And Hank," Evelyn said. Danny's expression shifted. "Taken in for questioning. Maddox said he said the written confession and the cooperation will count for something. He didn't arrest him, just brought him in to talk." He paused. "He doesn't look good, Hank. He looked like a man who's been carrying something a long time, and it finally got too heavy." Caleb said nothing. But Evelyn watched his face and saw the thing that moved through it, complicated, unresolved. The kind of feeling that doesn't simplify just because the situation does. 7 years of trust weaponized. 7 years of a man who could have asked for help and chose instead to steal. That kind of betrayal does not just convert into clean anger. It sits in a person and takes its time becoming something livable. "What are you going to do?" she asked him quietly later when Danny had gone and they were alone. Caleb leaned against the doorframe of the office she had become so familiar with, that posture, the particular way he held himself when he was thinking through something he hadn't resolved yet, and said, "I don't know yet about Hank." "You don't have to know yet," she said. "He stole from me for 6 years. He did. And he told the truth when it mattered. He did that too." Caleb looked at the floor for a moment. "My father used to say that a man shows you who he is twice. Once when things are easy, and once when they're not. The second time is the one that counts." "What do you think Hank showed you the second time?" she said carefully. "I think he showed me a man who made a terrible choice and then made a better one when he had the chance." He paused. "That doesn't fix the 6 years. But it's something." She said nothing. She let him sit with it the way she'd learned that Caleb Whitmore needed to sit with things, not to be helped through them or past them, but to stand in them until he found his own footing. "I'll talk to the lawyer," he said finally. "See if there's a way to separate what Garrett owed and what Hank owes. Garrett built the system. Hank participated. That's different." He looked up. "Or am I making excuses because he worked here 7 years?" "No," she said. "You're being precise. There is a difference. Whether the law sees it that way is another question, but the difference is real." He looked at her for a moment. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Say exactly the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the comfortable thing. The right thing." She thought about her father. About Saturday mornings and columns of figures, and the man who had taught her that truth was more useful than comfort. "I was taught well," she said. The town's reaction to Garrett's arrest was not what Evelyn expected. She expected the division to deepen, the people who had whispered about her from the beginning, who had decided what she was the moment she arrived on a ranch without a husband and with mud on her boots, to double down. She expected Adelaide Marsh. She expected the women at the post office. She expected the look she'd been getting for 6 weeks from people who had already decided. What she did not expect was Mrs. Aldrich. Martha Aldrich arrived at the ranch on Tuesday morning with a tin of cookies and an expression of complete, uncomplicated satisfaction. She sat down at the kitchen table without being asked, poured her own coffee, and looked at Evelyn with the look of a woman who had bet on a horse and watched it win. "Well," she said, "I told you he needed a bookkeeper." "You did," Evelyn said. "Garrett's been overcharging half the ranchers in this territory for years," Mrs. Aldrich said. "Everyone knew something was wrong. Nobody could prove it. Nobody tried." She looked at Evelyn directly. "You tried." "I had access to the records," Evelyn said. "You had more than that," Mrs. Aldrich said. "Don't be modest. It's unbecoming of the work you did." She took a cookie and bit into it without ceremony. People are talking, you know. Not the way they were before. What do you mean? I mean that the story going around Grayfield now is not the story about the woman living at Whitmore Ranch. It's the story about the woman who broke open a 6-year fraud that every man in this territory missed. She paused. You know what people say about you now? Evelyn shook her head. They say you're the best thing that happened to this county since the railroad. Mrs. Aldrich looked pleased with this. Even the ones who were unkind before, especially them. Nothing changes a person's opinion faster than finding out they were wrong about something expensive. Evelyn laughed. It came out surprised genuine, the kind of laugh that happens when you've been braced for a blow and get something entirely different. There'll be other ranchers coming to you, Mrs. Aldrich said, asking you to look at their records. You know that. I'm aware it's possible. Is that something you want your own practice? Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it. The question was simple on its surface and complicated underneath because the answer depended on things she had not fully decided yet. On where she was going to be. On what she was going to be to the man who was at this moment somewhere on his ranch, doing the work that never stopped. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Mrs. Aldrich looked at her with the particular knowing expression of an experienced woman who can read what's underneath an honest answer. She said nothing about it. She finished her coffee and her cookie and stood up and said, For what it's worth, I think you should stay. Not for the work, for the other reason. She left before Evelyn could respond. The other reason. Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen for a while after that. The same way she'd sat alone in this kitchen many times in 6 weeks and thought about the other reason. She thought about her plan. The plan she had maintained quietly at the back of her mind since the night Caleb asked her to stay until the case was done. The case was done. The documents were with the sheriff. Garrett was in custody. Hank had given his testimony. The ranch's accounting system was complete, documented, and could be operated by anyone with basic numerical literacy. There was nothing left that her employment required of her. She could leave. She had been telling herself for 2 weeks that she would. That when the work was finished, she would take her wages, fair wages, the wages of a man doing the same job exactly as she had negotiated, and she would write to Mrs. Aldrich about the schoolteacher position that had opened in the next county, and she would begin again. Clean. Her own. She still believed she should do that. She still believed it was the sensible, self-respecting thing to do. The thing that protected her from the particular vulnerability of needing someone, of depending on something that could be taken away. She had been in the business of things being taken away. She did not want more experience in that line. The problem. The thing she had been sitting with for 3 days now since the morning Caleb came back and stood in the doorway and said, I'm not good at this, with that look on his face that was more articulate than anything he was saying, was that she no longer entirely believed her own argument. She was still working through it when Caleb found her. He came in from outside, saw her at the table with her coffee and her thinking face, and stopped. He had learned her expressions, the way she had learned his, incrementally, without meaning to, the way you learn the language of a place you've been living. You're deciding something, he said. I'm thinking, she said, about leaving. It was not a question. She looked at him. My contract is complete, she said. The case is finished. The system is in place. There's no professional reason for me to stay. He came to the table, sat down across from her, not at the professional distance, not at the careful remove they had maintained for 5 weeks, but close the way he had sat the night she told him about Gerald, the way that said, I am talking to you, not to an employee. I know that, he said. Caleb, let me say something, he said, before you tell me the sensible thing. She stopped. He put his hands flat on the table. It was the posture of a man who is making himself stay still when everything in him wants to move. She recognized it because she had seen it before, not in him, but in herself. I have been alone for a long time, he said. Not by accident, by decision. After my father died and I took over this ranch at 19, I decided that needing people was a liability. That the ranch needed me, and that was enough, and that if I kept my head down and worked hard, and didn't ask for more than I had, I wouldn't have to risk losing anything else. He paused. That worked fine for 16 years. Or I thought it did. I thought the quiet was fine. I thought being alone was just the shape of my life, and I'd made my peace with it. She didn't move. She barely breathed. And then you knocked on my door, he said, in your impractical boots, telling me you didn't want pity, you just needed work. And I thought... He stopped. A brief hard stop, like hitting something he hadn't expected. I thought you were just someone who needed a job. I thought I was doing a practical thing. A practical nothing more than this thing. And, she said very quietly, and I have thought about you every single day since that first morning, he said. Not about the work, not about the records, about you, the way you think, the way you say exactly the right thing, not the easy thing, the way you stayed when you should have run and worked when you didn't have to, and told me the truth when lying would have been easier. He looked at her straight on the way he did everything, no deflection, no performance. I'm not asking you to stay as an employee. I stopped thinking of you as an employee approximately 2 weeks in, and I should have been honest about that sooner. Her heart was doing something she wasn't managing well. You're not asking me to stay as an employee, she said carefully. What are you asking? I'm asking you to stay as someone who matters to me, he said. As the person I want to talk to at the end of the day. As the person I want here. He stopped, looked at the table for a moment, then back up. I understand if this isn't what you came here for. If you want to go to the next county and start your own practice and build something that's completely yours. I understand that. And I'd be... He stopped again. I wouldn't stop you. But, she said. But I would miss you, he said. Every day, for the rest of my life. And I'd rather say that out loud now than spend another month not saying it and watching you leave. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere distant, one of the ranch hands was calling to another, and the ordinary sounds of the ranch continued as they always did, indifferent to the fact that in the kitchen, 2 people were sitting with something that had been growing for 6 weeks and was now finally completely named. Caleb, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. She decided that was all right. Some things should cost you something to say. I spent 3 years believing that I was only worth something when I was useful. When I was producing something that somebody needed. When my value was measurable. She stopped. I am afraid that what you feel is gratitude. Because I did something useful for you. Because I saved your ranch something. And I can't be someone's useful thing again. I won't do that to myself. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I was grateful to the man who built my north fence. I was grateful to the doctor who saved my hand when I cut it on wire 3 winters ago. I am grateful to every person who has done something useful for me. He leaned forward slightly. That is not what I feel for you, and I think you know that. She did know that. She had known it for 2 weeks, maybe longer. I'm frightened, she said, flat honest the way her father had taught her to state a thing. So am I, he said. I haven't done this before. I'm probably going to do it badly at least half the time. Something unlocked in her chest at that, at the honesty of it, the complete absence of any performance. I haven't done it well either, she said, in case that wasn't clear. The almost smile, the real one, the brief one, the one that changed his whole face. Except this time it didn't go away as fast. This time it stayed, and she saw what Caleb Whitmore looked like when he wasn't managing his face. When he was just a man sitting in his kitchen, looking at someone he loved. She thought, oh. And then she thought, there it is. Stay, he said, simply. A single word, no conditions. Yes, she said. It was the easiest word she had said in 3 years. He reached across the table and took her hand. Both hands around hers, the way a person holds something they've been afraid of losing. She felt the calluses from 16 years of ranch work, the solid warmth of them, and she pressed back. They sat like that for a moment, 2 people on the other side of something that had taken 6 weeks of difficulty and honesty and work to reach, and neither of them needed to say anything else. But the world as it turned out was not quite done with them. Adelaide Marsh came to the ranch that Thursday. Evelyn saw the buggy from the office window and felt her shoulders rise involuntarily. The body's memory of the last encounter of someone like you, of the pleasant voice that carried a blade. But this time, Adelaide did not ask for Caleb. She asked for Evelyn. Evelyn went to the front room. Adelaide was standing near the door, not in the center of the room the way she had been before. Not positioned, just standing. Her coat was the same expensive one, but something in her bearing was different, smaller, and not in a bad way. In the way of a person who has let something go that they were holding too tightly. "Miss Carter," she said. "Miss Marsh." A pause. Then Adelaide said with the visible effort of someone who has rehearsed and still finds it difficult, "I owe you an apology." Evelyn said nothing. She waited. "What I said to you the last time I was here. It was unkind, and it was wrong." Adelaide's jaw was set with the effort of this, and Evelyn, watching her, felt the complicated respect one feels for someone doing a hard thing badly, but honestly. "I've heard what you did, what you found, what it took to find it. Half the ranchers in this county owe you something whether they know it yet or not." She stopped. "And I was unkind to you because I was frightened. That's not an excuse. It's an explanation. There's a difference." "There is," Evelyn said quietly. Adelaide looked at her directly. "He chose well," she said. "Better than me. I can see that now, even if it's—" She stopped, steadied. "Even if it's hard to see." Evelyn felt something shift in the room, the particular shift of two women in a complicated situation, finding unexpectedly the shape of each other's humanity. "It takes courage to say that," Evelyn said. "It takes stupidity to have said what I said before and have to come back and correct it," Adelaide said with a small, dry precision that Evelyn found suddenly unexpectedly quite likable. "Good day, Miss Carter." "Good day, Miss Marsh." She watched the buggy leave and stood for a moment in the quiet after. Then she turned around and found Caleb in the hallway, and from the look on his face, he had heard at least part of it. "You didn't have to be kind to her," he said. "I know," she said. "But she told the truth when it cost her something. I respect that in a person." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "I know why I'm in love with you." It was the first time either of them had said it that directly. It landed in the air between them with a weight that was not heavy, but was solid, the weight of something real. "Tell me why," she said. "Because you're better at being fair than almost anyone I've ever met," he said. "And you don't even know you're doing it." She felt warmth move through her that had nothing to do with the fire behind her. "I'm not always fair," she said honestly. "I was not fair to you the first 2 weeks. I had you categorized before I knew you. What did you think I was? I thought you were a man who would undervalue me and overestimate himself," she said. "I was wrong on both counts." He almost laughed. A real one, not quite but close, and she held the sound of it like something she intended to keep. "You didn't show it." "I showed it a little," she said. "That first morning. When I told you I could see from across the room that your ledgers were a disaster." "That wasn't unfair," he said. "They were." "They were," she agreed. And there it was, two people laughing quietly in a kitchen in Montana about the specific disaster of a ledger system and the specific miracle of the morning that had started everything. Laughing like people who have earned the right to laugh, who have gone through enough that the lightness of it feels like something they built rather than something that just arrived. The letter from the territorial court arrived 2 weeks later. Garrett had been formally charged. The federal marshal had reviewed the evidence. Evelyn's complete case, Hank's confession, Danny's testimony, the territorial filing records, and the preliminary judgment was unambiguous. The case was as clean as Maddox had said it was. Garrett's company was suspended. His assets were frozen pending restitution calculations. His legal team had already contacted the ranchers' council about settlement. Caleb read the letter at the desk where Evelyn had first spread the invoices and showed him what the numbers were saying. He read it twice, set it down, and sat very still for a moment. She was across the room working on the quarterly summary she'd been building, and she watched him without speaking. "It's done," he said. "Yes." 6 years, he said. "Yes." He looked at the letter for another moment. Then he looked at her. "What do you need?" he said. "From this, from what you built. You did this work. You should be compensated for it beyond our original arrangement." Caleb. "I'm serious," he said. "What you built here is worth more than 4 weeks of wages. I want to do this right." She looked at him for a moment. The man who had kept his porch steps solid, who said thank you for telling me, who rode 12 hours through the night, because someone he trusted sent word that she might need him. "I want to do something with the system I built," she said. "Not just for this ranch, for others. Mrs. Aldrich is right that there'll be other ranchers who need this. I want to offer it as a proper service." She paused. "I'd need a place to work, an office, somewhere I can meet people and keep records. There's a room above the post office in Grayfield that's been empty for 2 years, Caleb said immediately. It came out fast enough that she understood he had already been thinking about this. "The postmaster's been looking for someone to rent it. It's a good space." "You've already looked into it," she said. "I looked into it," he said simply. "In case it was something you wanted." She felt it again, the particular warmth of being known. Of someone paying attention, not to what you said you needed, but to what you were, and finding ways to make room for it before you even asked. "I'd like to see it," she said. "We can go tomorrow," he said. She nodded. Went back to her figures. He went back to the letter. After a moment, without looking up, she said, "Caleb." "Yeah. I love you too," in case I hadn't said it clearly enough. A pause. The kind of pause that has texture to it, not empty, but full. "You hadn't," he said. "But I knew." "How did you know?" "Because you stayed," he said. "When you had every reason not to, you stayed." She thought about the woman who had walked 2 miles in impractical boots through Montana snow because she had nothing left to lose. She thought about what that woman had found. Not a job, though she'd found that. Not safety, though she'd found that too. But this, a place where who she was completely and without performance was not just tolerated, but wanted. Not her usefulness. Not her skills. Her. The person underneath the bookkeeper, the survivor, the daughter of a man who loved numbers. She had spent 3 years looking for that and not finding it. She had found it by accident in the middle of a Montana winter, on the porch of a man who didn't need another worker and hadn't known until she showed up what he was missing. That night, for the first time in as long as she could remember, Evelyn Carter sat at the dinner table in the ranch house and did not calculate anything. Did not analyze or assess or build a picture from the available information. Did not plan her next move or protect herself from the one after. She just sat with the warmth and the food and the man across the table who kept his word and let herself be exactly where she was. It was the most extraordinary feeling she had ever had, simple and solid and entirely enough. The office above the post office in Grayfield was exactly what Evelyn needed, and nothing more than that, which was precisely why it was right. It was small. The desk that came with it wobbled on one leg until she fixed it herself with a folded piece of cardboard from a supply box, which Caleb watched her do with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and admiration, and settled comfortably in both. There was a window that let in good morning light. There was a shelf she filled within 2 weeks. There was a sign she had Danny paint for her in careful letters, Carter Accounting Services, E. Carter Proprietor. Danny had painted it with the focused gravity of a man executing something important, his tongue between his teeth, and when he hung it on the door, he stood back and looked at it like he'd built a cathedral. "That looks right," he said. "It does," she agreed. It looked right because it was right. That was the thing she kept coming back to in those first weeks of building something that was entirely, irreducibly hers. Not her father's legacy, not her uncle's instrument, not Caleb's ranch, but her own practice, her own name on a door, her own work going out into the world under her own authority. She had not known until she had it how much she had needed it. Not the security, the identity, the daily confirmation that she existed outside of what she was to other people. Caleb understood that. He never said you don't have to work. He never said the ranch provides enough. He said, "Let me know if you need anything for the office." And he said it once, and then he let her build it the way she needed to build it, which was herself in her own way, on her own terms. That was the thing about Caleb Whitmore. He did not love her in spite of who she was. He loved her because of it, and those are entirely different things, and the difference matters more than most people ever understand. The first client came through the door of Carter Accounting Services on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after the sign went up. His name was Fletcher, and he ran a mid-size cattle operation 12 miles north, and he had heard from his neighbor, who had heard from Maddox, who had apparently told everyone who would listen about the Carter woman who had broken Garrett's fraud operation, with nothing but 9 years of ledgers and the ability to read them. Fletcher sat across from her desk and put a box of records in front of her and said, "I think someone's been overcharging me for grain. Can't prove it." Evelyn looked at the box, looked at Fletcher's face, the honest, weathered face of a man who works hard and trusts people longer than he should, because that's the kind of man he is. "Leave these with me," she said. "Come back Thursday." He came back Thursday. She had found 4 discrepancies totaling $620 over 3 years. She had a documented case ready to present. She placed it in front of him on the desk and watched his face go through 4 different expressions in the space of 30 seconds. Disbelief, recognition, anger, and then something complicated and grateful. "Thursday," he said. "You did this by Thursday." "The numbers were willing to talk," she said. "I just listened." Fletcher paid her fee without question. He also, she discovered later, told 6 people before he got home. Word in Grayfield traveled at the speed of personal testimony, and personal testimony about money recovered was the fastest-moving word of all. By the end of her first month, Carter Accounting Services had 7 clients. By the end of the second month, 14. By spring, she had more work than she could manage in the mornings, and was extending her hours into the afternoons, and had begun quietly to think about whether she needed to hire an assistant. She told Caleb this over dinner one evening, not asking his permission, which she would not have done, but telling him because she told him everything now, because that was the shape of what they had become. 2 people who told each other everything and had built a life on the foundation of that honesty. He listened. Then he said, "Danny's youngest sister just finished schooling in Billings. She's been looking for a position." Evelyn looked at him. "You already thought about this." "I thought about it last week when you came home late 4 days in a row and ate dinner with your eyes half closed." "I was not half closed." "Evie," he said, "you put salt in your coffee." She had in fact put salt in her coffee. She had not mentioned it, and she had drunk it anyway because she was too tired to start over. "I'll speak to Danny," she said. "She's good with numbers," Caleb said. "Danny says she taught herself bookkeeping from a mail-order correspondence course. He's been embarrassingly proud of it." "Danny is embarrassingly proud of most things," she said. "That's true." Caleb agreed, and the smile on his face, the full one, the real one that she had been accumulating, like something precious since the first time she saw it, was the particular smile of a man who is deeply, genuinely content. It still caught her sometimes. The way it changed his face. The way it arrived without warning and made her feel every time like she had been given something she hadn't expected. It was in this way, the accumulation of small, ordinary moments that were not small at all, that spring came to Whitmore Ranch and to Grayfield and to the life Evelyn Carter was building in Montana. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare. The way real things come one day at a time, each day, adding its weight to the foundation, until you look back and realize that what you're standing on is solid. The Garrett trial was scheduled for late April. Evelyn received the formal summons to testify in the 3rd week of March, and she held the envelope for a moment before she opened it, feeling the particular weight of official paper in her hands. She had built this case. She had put these pages together, one invoice at a time, one discrepancy at a time, sitting in a cold office in the Montana winter with a ledger and a lamp, and the conviction that the numbers were telling a story that deserved to be heard. Now the story was going to be told in front of a territorial court, and Curtis Garrett was going to sit across the room and watch her tell it. She was not afraid. She recognized that it might have been reasonable to be afraid. Garrett had money and lawyers and connections, and the particular confidence of a man who had operated for years on the assumption that nobody in this territory had the capacity to touch him. But Evelyn had been afraid before, and she knew the difference between fear and the clean, purposeful tension of someone walking into a room where they know exactly what they have and exactly what they're going to do with it. She told Caleb about the summons at breakfast. He set down his coffee cup. "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I'll come with you," he said again. Not a discussion. She looked at him. "It could be several days." "I know." "The ranch." "Tom and Danny can manage the ranch for a week," he said. "I'll come with you." He held her gaze. "You've been walking into rooms alone your whole life, Evelyn. You don't have to do that anymore." She felt the truth of it land somewhere deep and quiet. Not that she couldn't walk into rooms alone, she could, and she had, and she would again if she had to. But there was something in the word anymore that she let herself receive. The future tense of it. The implication that this was not just about one trial in one courtroom, but about the long pattern of her life and how it was going to be different now. "All right," she said. "Thank you." He picked up his coffee again. "Don't thank me. I want to watch you take him apart." She laughed. Genuine and bright, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere unguarded. The trial lasted 3 days. Evelyn testified on the second day. She took the stand and laid out the case she had built, the same way she had laid it out for Caleb 7 months earlier, methodically, precisely, with the patience of someone who understands that numbers only work when the person listening understands what they mean. She spoke to the judge and the assembled court, the way her father had taught her to speak to anyone who held authority over something important directly, without apology, with complete command of her material. Garrett's lawyer tried 3 times to undermine her testimony. He questioned her credentials. She cited 9 years of practical experience and documented outcomes. He questioned her methodology. She walked through it step by step until the judge visibly lost patience with the questioning. He tried in a final gambit that she had anticipated and prepared for to suggest that as a woman employed on the defendant's primary accuser's ranch, she had a personal interest in the outcome. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. Then she said very clearly, "My interest is in accurate accounting. It was accurate accounting that found this fraud before I had any personal connection to Whitmore Ranch. My personal situation is a consequence of my professional work, not a motivation for it. The documents speak for themselves, regardless of who built them." The courtroom was quiet. Garrett's lawyer sat down. From the gallery she was almost certain she heard a very quiet sound from the direction where Caleb was sitting, that was as close to a cheer as a man like Caleb Whitmore would ever produce in a court of law. The verdict came on the 3rd day. Guilty on 6 counts of fraudulent filing with the territorial government. Guilty on 12 counts of obtaining payment by deception. Garrett was fined to a sum that would require the sale of significant assets. His business license was revoked. 3 additional ranchers who had come forward during the trial's preparation, men who had suspected for years and had their suspicions confirmed by Evelyn's public testimony, were awarded restitution. Hank Dooley received a suspended sentence conditional on full cooperation with the court and restitution to Whitmore Ranch over a 5-year period. It was less than many thought he deserved and more merciful than he had expected. When Caleb was asked in the corridor outside the courthouse by a man from the territorial newspaper whether he thought justice had been served in Dooley's case, Caleb looked at the question for a moment and said, "I think a man made bad choices and then made better ones. The law addressed the bad ones. The better ones, he'll have to live with himself." He walked away from the journalist before the follow-up question could be asked. Evelyn, walking beside him, said quietly, "That was well said." "I meant it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why it was well said." They rode back to Grayfield in the late afternoon, and when they came through town, there were people who nodded at them, real nods, the kind that meant something, not the guarded acknowledgement of people deciding what they thought about the woman at Whitmore Ranch. The kind of nod you give someone you respect. Mrs. Aldrich was standing outside the schoolhouse as they passed. She raised one hand. Evelyn raised one back. It was not a dramatic moment. It was better than dramatic. It was real. The second twist arrived in May, and it arrived on horseback, and it arrived loud. They heard them before they saw them. The kind of sound that carries across flat land, the way thunder carries a deep rolling percussion of multiple riders moving fast. Evelyn was in the yard when they came through the main gate, and her first instinct was a sharp, practical alarm. Too many moving too fast. And the sound of them was nothing like ranch hands or travelers or anyone she had learned to recognize in 7 months in Montana. There were 9 of them. 9 men on 9 horses, leather-clad, road-worn, the kind of faces that had been weathered by distance rather than by any single place. They pulled up in the yard with the loose, practiced ease of people who spend more time on horseback than on ground, and the one in front broader than the others. A beard that had been growing since before winter, eyes that were sharp and assessing under the brim of a hat that had seen better decades, looked at Evelyn standing in the yard and said, "This Whitmore ranch." "It is," she said. "Caleb Whitmore around." "I'll find him," she said. She went to the barn. Caleb came out, saw the 9 riders in his yard, and stood for a moment reading the scene with the same still assessment he gave everything. The man in front looked at him. Something passed between them, not recognition exactly. Something more like the assessment of 2 men who have both been measured by the same kind of life and understand what they're looking at. "Name's Cole," the man said. "We've been riding the territory since February. Heard about what happened with Garrett, heard about the case, what it meant for ranchers who'd been getting bled for years." He paused. "Heard a woman built it." Caleb said, "She did." Cole looked back at Evelyn. "That you?" "Yes," she said. Cole nodded, once the kind of nod that contains an entire judgment. "We need a place to camp for 2 nights, he said. "We'll work for it, whatever you need done." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "You'll eat at the house," he said. "We don't charge for a camp." Something shifted in Cole's face. A brief thing. "That's not necessary." "I know it's not necessary," Caleb said. "I'm offering it anyway." "That's different." Cole looked at him. Then he said, "All right." Those 2 days, the 9 riders camped on Whitmore land, eating at the long kitchen table that Evelyn had extended with 2 boards from the barn. The house louder than it had ever been with voices and laughter, and the particular energy of people who carry their whole lives on their backs and know how to be present in a place precisely because they never stay. Those 2 days were something Evelyn would carry for the rest of her life, not because of anything dramatic, because of what she saw in Caleb. She had seen him with his ranch hands, fair, direct, reliable. She had seen him with her with the careful, honest love of a man who had learned to mean what he said. She had not seen him in a room full of strangers who were nothing like him, who operated by different codes and carried different histories, and she had not known until those 2 days what that looked like. How was the same? That was the extraordinary thing. He was exactly the same, direct, unpretentious, genuinely interested in what people had to say, with the complete absence of performance that she had fallen in love with in the first place. Cole sat across from him at the table the second night, and they talked for 3 hours about cattle and weather and territory and loss, and the particular difficulty of building something in a place that doesn't care whether you make it or not. And Evelyn sat at the end of the table and listened and thought, "This is who he is. Everywhere. For everyone, not just for me." That was when she understood fully what she had. On the morning the riders left, Cole stopped his horse at the gate and looked back at the house, then at Evelyn standing in the yard. "That case you built," he said. "Word of it is going further than you think. People in places you've never heard of are talking about it." He paused. "You should know that." "I was just reading the numbers," she said. "No," Cole said. "You were doing what most people can't. You were telling the truth when nobody was making you." He looked at her steadily. "That travels." He clicked his horse forward, and they were gone 9 riders into the Montana morning, and the yard was quiet, in the way it always was after something significant had passed through it. Danny, standing beside Evelyn, let out a long breath. "Well," he said. "That was something." "It was," she said. Caleb came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. He put his arm around her shoulders, the easy, habitual gesture of someone who has been doing it long enough that it's no longer thought about, just done, and they stood together and watched the road long after the riders had gone out of sight. The letter from Gerald arrived in June. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope and felt the familiar contraction, the old reflex, the body's memory of what that handwriting had meant. She held the letter for a moment before she opened it, standing at the post office counter, making herself breathe slowly. It was longer than the last one. Gerald had more to say this time, because this time he had heard more. Word had, as Cole had said, traveled further than she knew. A man in a territorial court, who had his fraudulent operations dismantled by a woman's accounting work, was the kind of story that moved, and it had moved back to Boston, and it had moved in the specific circles where her father's name was still remembered. Gerald wrote about how proud her father would have been. He wrote about the firm, his firm, the one rebuilt under another name from her father's clients, and about how there might be a real position for her, a partnership possibility if she ever wanted to come home. He wrote, "Come home," as though Boston were her home, as though home were a fixed coordinate that didn't move with the person. She read the letter twice. Then she sat down at the writing desk in the corner of the post office and wrote back immediately, because she had learned from her father and from the past 8 months that the truth deferred is just a harder truth to tell later. "Dear Gerald," she wrote. "Thank you for writing. I am glad to hear the firm is in good health. I will not be returning to Boston. I have built a practice here that is entirely my own, and a life that is entirely my choosing, and I find I would not trade either for any arrangement elsewhere. I wish you well. Evelyn." She sealed the envelope. She paid for the stamp. She handed it to the postmaster and walked out into the June morning and felt the clean, uncomplicated lightness of a door closed firmly from the inside. She was 3 steps from the post office when she walked directly into Caleb, who was coming up the steps with a package from the supply store. He caught her by both arms before she stumbled, looked at her face. "You got a letter," he said. Not a question. "From Gerald." And I wrote back." She paused. "I told him I wasn't coming home." Something in Caleb's face went very still in the particular way that meant he was feeling something significant and was deciding whether to let her see it. She decided for him. "I told him I wasn't coming home because I am home," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set down the package right there on the post office steps and put both hands on either side of her face, the way he had that first early morning after the long night, and he kissed her, not like they were alone on the ranch, but right there on the steps of the Grayfield post office in the middle of the morning, with whoever wanted to watch watching. She heard someone from across the street. She was almost certain it was Mrs. Aldrich make a sound of pure, satisfied approval. When he pulled back, she said, "People are watching." "Let them watch," he said. And the particular echo of what he had said all those months ago to Adelaide, "Let them talk," landed with all the weight of how much had changed since then. She laughed. He picked up his package. They walked back to the wagon together. Summer arrived, and the ranch expanded, not in land, but in life. The quarterly accounts Evelyn had built became the model that 3 neighboring ranches adopted. The record-keeping system she had designed was cited in the territorial court's findings on the Garrett case as an example of best practice. A letter arrived from a judge in Helena asking if she would be willing to consult on a similar case 2 counties over. She said yes because the work mattered, and because saying yes to things that mattered was something she had decided in the past 8 months to practice without apology. Danny's sister Clara arrived at the office the 2nd week of June and turned out to be everything Danny's embarrassing pride had advertised. Quick, careful, genuinely gifted with figures, and possessed of the particular quality Evelyn valued most in a colleague: the willingness to say, "I don't know," before guessing, and I was wrong after discovering it. Within 6 weeks, Carter Accounting Services had doubled its capacity. Within 3 months, they had taken on 12 new clients and were turning away requests they couldn't accommodate. Evelyn taught Clara the way her father had taught her, not by lecturing, but by working beside her, showing her the shapes that numbers make when they're lying, and the different shapes they make when they're telling the truth. Clara was 20 years old, and she learned fast, and she reminded Evelyn sometimes so sharply of the girl she had been at 20. Sitting on a stool beside her father's desk on Saturday mornings, with her feet not reaching the floor, that it made something in her chest ache in a way that was not pain, but was close to it. The good kind of close. She told Caleb this one evening, sitting by the fire in the room where she had once been a temporary employee, sleeping in the spare room upstairs. He listened, The way he listened to everything she said completely, without dividing his attention with the patience of someone who understands that some things need to be heard all the way through before they need a response. "You're teaching her what your father taught you," he said. "I suppose I am." "Is that hard?" She thought about it. "No," she said slowly. It feels right. Like the thing was worth keeping." She paused. "Not just the skill, the idea of it. That someone sits beside you and shows you how to read the truth. That gets passed on." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father would have liked this place," he said. "I think he would have liked that you built something here." She felt the truth of it like a hand pressed against her chest, not heavy, just present. "He would have liked you," she said. "He respected people who worked hard and told the truth. You do both." "I try," Caleb said in the way he said things he meant completely, but wasn't going to make bigger than they were. She reached across and took his hand. He turned it and held hers back. The proposal happened in October, which was not a season Evelyn had expected, because October in Montana was brutal and beautiful in equal measure, and not the kind of month that suggested romance in any conventional sense. But Caleb had never done anything in the conventional sense, and she had stopped expecting him to. They were riding back from the south pasture in the late afternoon. She had started riding with him in the evenings. Not every evening, but most, because the land looked different from horseback, and she had come to love the particular rhythm of it when he pulled his horse up without warning and turned to face her. She stopped beside him. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out something small. He held it out to her on his open palm. It was a ring, plain gold, a single small stone, nothing extravagant. The kind of ring a man chooses when he wants the ring to say something real rather than something impressive. He did not get down on one knee, because they were on horseback on a hillside in October, and that would have been impractical, and Caleb Whitmore was above all a practical man. He just held it out and looked at her with those winter sky eyes and said, "I've been carrying this for 3 weeks waiting for the right moment." "And this is the right moment," she said, looking at the hill, the horses, the cold afternoon. "This is the only moment I've felt like myself in 3 weeks," he said, "because you're here." She felt the full weight of it, not the ring, not the gesture, but the sentence. "Because you're here." The summary of 8 months. The thing they had both learned about themselves through the difficulty of learning it together. That here where there was honesty and work and the willingness to stay was where they became most fully themselves. "Yes," she said. She did not make him ask more specifically than that. They both knew what the question was. He put the ring on her finger. She held her hand out and looked at it for a moment, the small plain ring on the hand of a woman who had arrived in Montana with nothing on the hand, that had built a case from nothing and a practice from nothing and a life from nothing, except the absolute refusal to believe that nothing was all she deserved. "It fits," she said. "I measured when you were sleeping," he said. She looked at him. "You measured my finger while I was sleeping." "I was discreet about it." "You were not at all discreet about it," she said. "I felt you do it." He almost smiled. "The real one." "And you didn't say anything." "I wanted to see what you were going to do," she said. "You always want to see what people are going to do," he said. "It's useful information," she said. "It tells you who they are." "And what did I tell you?" She looked at the ring, looked at him. At the man who had opened his door in the Montana winter to a woman with impractical boots, and no good reason for any reasonable person to take a chance on, and had taken the chance anyway, and had kept his word every day since. "You told me everything I needed to know," she said. "On the first night, before you even knew you were doing it." They rode back to the ranch in the cold October afternoon, and when they came through the gate, Danny saw them from the barn and looked at Evelyn's hand and let out a sound that was not quite a word in any language, but communicated everything it needed to. "Finally," he said to nobody in particular, and everybody at once. The wedding was in December, small and plain, in the front room of the ranch house where it had all begun. Mrs. Aldrich cried. Danny cried, and then denied it. Clara sat in the front row with her accounting notebook in her lap, because she had been working on a client summary on the ride over, and Evelyn had told her to bring it because life and work were not separate things in her world and never had been, and that was right. Evelyn wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she had ordered from Billings Practical in blue, because she had never liked impractical things, even in celebrations. She walked across the room to where Caleb was standing, because there was no aisle and no one to give her away, because she was not something to be given. She was a person arriving of her own motion, under her own authority, because she had chosen this. He looked at her, the way he had looked at her from the first morning. Reading, assessing, taking her in completely. And then his face did the thing she had been watching for 8 months. The thing that still caught her every time, the full real smile, the one that changed everything. She had come to Montana with nothing. She had knocked on a stranger's door in the snow with nothing to offer but her skills and her refusal to be less than she was. She had found fraud and exposed it and built a practice from the ground up and loved a man who told the truth even when it was difficult, and been loved back by someone who saw her, not the useful version, not the employee, not the survivor, but her exactly as she was. What her uncle had taken from her, she had rebuilt. What her father had given her, she had carried forward. What life had thrown at her, she had met without flinching and built something from anyway. The woman who arrived looking for a way to survive had found something she had not known she was looking for. And the lonely cowboy who thought he needed another worker had found the only thing he had ever truly been missing. Neither of them had come looking for this. And that was the only way it could have been real, because the best things don't arrive when you're searching for them. They arrive when you knock on a door in the snow with impractical boots and a determination to tell the truth, and someone on the other side is finally ready to let you in. And this time, the door stayed open.